Hello, and welcome back to Stand By for Adventure. My name is John, and today we're going to talk about a couple of things. First off, it's THAC0 Thursday, so going to do a quick THAC0 thing, nostalgia, bit of old AD&D game design from the early 80s. But really, today I wanted to talk about, excuse me, I wanted to talk about this announcement from Paizo that they're doing a 5e version of an adventure path called the Abomination Vaults. I've actually not heard of Abomination Vaults, which is weird because I get all of the Pathfinder adventures, and there are all sorts of people freaking out about the fact that Paizo is doing this 5e content, and let me just back up a little bit. So, D&D created 1974. Gary Gygax, Dave Arneson. I know previously when I've talked about D&D and its creation, I neglected to include Dave Arneson, and I will endeavor to do that from now on because there would be no setting and quite a lot of the innovations that went into D&D without Arneson's involvement, and he deserves absolutely equal billing to Gygax, I think. Anyway, D&D started in 1974. It was a horribly run company, TSR, and there may have been moments where it was run well, but overall it was run incredibly poorly. I worked in distribution back in the 90s, right when they were going through some of their worst adjustments because of companies like Wizards of the Coast that came out of nowhere with Magic the Gathering and completely changed the face of, well, game retailing. And it didn't really change all that much in distribution other than TSR suddenly had a whole lot of competition for people's attention because Magic was just so huge, which is eventually what led to TSR failing as a company because they had invested heavily in novels and books and sent out all sorts of books that, and there's a whole ton that goes into this, and I'm sure I'm missing some really key points, but they got a huge number of returns that they just couldn't afford to receive, which eventually ended up kind of tanking the company. The company got purchased by Wizards of the Coast in 1999. So at this point, Wizards of the Coast has owned TSR longer than, or owned D&D and all their products longer than TSR ever did, which is really weird to think of. Wizards of the Coast absolutely has been a more well-run company overall, especially after their acquisition from Hasbro. And I'm sure there's all sorts of messed up things. I remember for years and years there was the Christmas time firings at Wizards of the Coast that was just completely ridiculous and just flat out poor management. Hopefully that'll be much better now, especially that Ray Winninger is in charge there. I know Ray from gaming and from Friends of Friends and things like that. And he's a super smart, super good guy. And I'm really excited that he's in charge. I'm super excited. I think he's an absolutely perfect person to have in that position. Anyway, this is all inside baseball knowledge because I've been in the gaming industry for 30 years now, one way or another, from retail through distribution through publishing company, all that sort of stuff. So I know some of this stuff, even if some of my information is a little bit out of date. I have not been that out of touch with the game industry for well, I'm still not that out of touch. I talk to a lot of people on a regular basis who are still actively involved in the gaming industry as publishers and writers and all sorts of stuff. Anyway, this is important, all this history of TSR and everything, because at one point, some of the people who worked at TSR, not at TSR, who worked at Wizards of the Coast, who worked on D&D, decided to split off, and as part of that split, they had, and they worked at Wizards of the Coast, Again, I don't know the specifics about how this worked out, but Wizards of the Coast decided we don't want to publish our Dragon magazine or Dungeon magazine anymore. Those were two magazines that had been around literally for decades. Dungeon magazine was, I think, a bi-monthly collection of a bunch of adventures for D&D. Very much sort of like the adventure path, except they were all individual adventures. They didn't string together. They didn't even necessarily string together from month to month to create an entire campaign. Certainly should have. That should have been a thing from the first day of D&D, but people didn't realize where all of this was going to be going. So they had these two magazines, Dungeon and Dragon. Seems to make sense, right? And Dragon was the magazine that's about all sorts of general information or articles about here's a new character class, here's the ecology of the beholder, here's it could be any number of different things that would have been in Dragon magazine, which was the sort of more fun monthly informational, all sorts of cool content, keep you up to date on what books are coming out, what role-playing or what computer games are coming out, what other games were out there in the industry to check out. It was a very, very fun magazine, and the Dragon Plus downloadable magazine that Wizards of the Coast produces now is absolutely the inheritor of all the Dragon magazine stuff. Now, when they split off those two magazines, Lisa Stevens, her partner Vic, I think it's her husband, Vic and Vic Wirtz, and I forget exactly who else was involved, but I'm sure those were the first two main people, and split off to form Paizo. And they said, listen, TSR, or Wizards of the Coast, you don't need to worry about producing your magazines anymore. We'll do that, and you trust us to do this because we are the people who were doing it at Wizards of the Coast. And Eric Mona is the other main person. And Eric has been the editor-in-chief, I don't even know his exact title anymore, at Paizo since, I think, the very beginning. Eric's super good guy, knows his stuff, knows his TSR and Wizards of the Coast history. He's worked for Wizards of the Coast for years. He's worked now at Paizo since, I think, the very beginning. And so these people have a really strong connection to D&D. And Lisa Stevens, who is one of the owners of Paizo, was one of the people who first worked at Wizards of the Coast with Peter Atkinson. I think she was the first actual employee. And so there is a lot of sort of interconnectedness here going on. And so when you see Paizo announce that they're going to be doing 5e content, first off, this isn't new. They've done already some 5e content or announced it. They're doing the Kingmaker adventure that they kickstarted last year or 2 years ago with a 5e option. Which is fantastic. They're also doing this new adventure path in 5e, and I can imagine they'll be either writing up future adventure paths with both Pathfinder and 5e versions, or they'll be converting old stuff to 5e. Now, some people, like I said, are freaking out about this because they see it as, oh, Pathfinder 2e must not be doing well, and Pathfinder 2e just, it may not be enough to keep the company going and blah blah blah. No, I don't know their books. I don't know their accounting, how well they're doing as a company, but believe me, the fact that they're putting out 5e products does not have anything to do with Pathfinder not doing well. What really what I see it as, and this would be absolutely 100% my thinking if I were Eric or Lisa or any of the people in charge over at Paizo, is they're dealing with Pathfinder 1e, Pathfinder 2e, and those games are great. I mean, Pathfinder is very much the successor to 3rd edition and 3.5, and I loved that version of the game. I mean, it was easily up to that point the absolute best version of that game. And it was very crunchy. It had lots of adjustments and modifiers and things to keep track of, and it was very, what I call, fiddly. You had a lot of things to keep track of, and that's fine. Some people that really, really appeals to. They like all the different modifiers and how can I get the most out of this situation right now, and okay, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And for some people, that is part of the fun of the game, and I 100% understand that. I love that part of it. That's the board game part that I'm talking about when I say there's the board game aspect of role playing and then there's the acting part of role playing. And people get into, one of those two extremes or somewhere in the middle. That's just what they like. So a Pathfinder, or rather Pathfinder 1E and 2E players who already exist probably know that 5e isn't the game for them because it's a little more streamlined. It doesn't have as many modifiers because it uses advantage and disadvantage to get rid of all those different modifiers. And otherwise, the modifiers are really minor. But the feel is very different. The game for 5e is more streamlined, and I'm sure the people who are Pathfinder fans would say dumbed down or simple or whatever, but really it's just a different interpretation of how to tell the same sorts of stories. It is neither better nor worse than Pathfinder, and Pathfinder is neither better nor worse than 5e. It just appeals to different people. It does the exact same thing. It allows you to sit around a table with your friends and tell stories within a certain rule system so that you're not fighting about did you hit me, did you not hit me, etc., etc. The dice indicate that. They tell you what happened. But what's nice about Paizo being able to do 5e products is that they're not, and I don't mean this in a bad way, they're not stuck doing only Pathfinder 1st and 2nd edition content for their already existing customers. They can instead take their content, and when I say content, I mean the stories, the monsters, the plot lines, the characters, the setting, the Golarian setting, all of those fantastic countries that they have defined throughout Golarian that have, sorry, my cat is here, that have, that each have their own personality, right? Like there's sort of the gothic horror setting that, of course, I can't think of off the top of my head, but I absolutely loved. It was probably one of their absolute best adventure paths were set there. The Carrion Crown, I think that was it. Super, super cool adventure path. And but they would be able to convert that stuff to 5e, just like they're doing with this Abomination Vaults. And what that allows them to do is expose all of those adventures and their setting and their aesthetic to all these new 5e players who have come about in the last 10 years and really the last 7 years. And I'm almost certain that the advent of 2nd edition Pathfinder had more to do with Critical Role and the success of 5e than it had to do necessarily with Pathfinder 1e not doing well enough. They needed to shake something up in order to call more attention to Pathfinder itself, because it was getting more competition from 5e and from people who had entered the hobby through something like Critical Role. And this is Pathfinder and Paizo's ability to, or the chance, to get all of their stuff in front of all these new players that they would otherwise not have an on-road. Like, there wouldn't be a way for those players to transfer over to Pathfinder and the Golarian setting because it's not something that those new players would even be looking for. They weren't around for 3rd edition to know that they might have liked that edition of the game, And because of that, they wouldn't have any reason to be invested in a third edition D&D variant like Pathfinder, and they also wouldn't have a reason to check out what the world is like in Galarian and what their adventures were like, because it's not 5e content. So if you're a company like Paizo and you have all of these fantastic books from 10 or 15 years of publishing your own setting, you're absolutely going to look at that and go, this is already all done. What we need to go through and do is convert all of the rules from Pathfinder to 5e. And that's only, I mean, it's a significant amount of work, don't get me wrong. But that's way, way easier than writing an entire adventure path from scratch, including the 5e content. In this case, all you're doing is converting all the difficulties from Pathfinder difficulties to 5e difficulties, changing all the modifiers and things like that to what they should be in 5e, changing the stats. And again, that's a ton of work because you have to convert all of that. But it doesn't signal the death knell of Pathfinder. Not in any way. Not even, I mean, maybe this is the beginning of the potential end that might come in 10 or 20 years to Pathfinder, but I don't even necessarily believe that. There's a lot of things that can happen in the next 10 to 20 years for a company like this that who knows? I mean, anything could happen, right? And like I said, the fact that they want to come out with 5e product is just because they can. They have people there who I'm sure are huge fans of 5e. I'm sure they play the game. I'm sure they talk to the people over at Wizards of the Coast on a fairly regular basis, even if it's just on a social level, because all these people have worked together and we all still live in the same city. We're all in the Seattle area. Eric Mona is somewhere around here. James Jacobs is around here. I know Vic and Lisa live not far from here. Jeremy Crawford, Monty Cook, like all these people all work and live in the Seattle area, and they all know each other from having worked at Wizards of the Coast together, or at least in the gaming industry together. So no, this Paizo doing 5e content is not a death knell for Pathfinder, and in fact, in many, many ways, this is an absolutely fantastic opportunity for Paizo to get their setting and their other adventure content in front of people who are playing 5e and who would never check out Pathfinder. It gives them the chance to put it in front of these new players so that they are exposed to it, and maybe they will look at Pathfinder and go, oh, maybe I want to play this game. It has like a bunch more modifiers and things going on with it, and oh my god, there's so many different classes that I can be and ways to customize my character and epic levels and all sorts of crazy stuff, all these amazing adventures. And that's what they want. They want to get that in front of these new players, and that's exactly what they're doing with this. And that's it. It's a relatively inexpensive, not a zero cost, but a relatively inexpensive way to repurpose stuff they already have that they know is good, they know is successful, and package it for new players that they can then hopefully bring into the fold and say, hey, if you like this, you might like some of our other things. We are going to see more adventures in 5e and 5e content in general, I think, from Pathfinder. I think there's no way that doesn't happen. And this is the first of those after the very first, so I don't know why this one is causing that much of an uproar. I saw somebody comment that the book for this is $59.99, which is $10 more than what, say, Call of the Netherdeep cost. And I don't know the precise reason for that, because I don't know how many pages this book is versus Call of the Netherdeep, but let's assume it's the exact same number of pages. this adventure for Pathfinder, Abomination Vaults, would not have sold as many copies as any single adventure from Wizards of the Coast for 5e. I'm just going to say that I have 100% confidence that that's true. 100%. I have no doubt that that's true, that the Abomination Vaults did not sell as much as any of the adventures from Wizards of the Coast for 5e. I am happy to be wrong. If Eric Mona wants to come and tell me nope, but I know Eric doesn't know exactly how many of each adventure was published. Maybe he does, actually. Maybe in some private conversations that information has been told to him. But regardless, it doesn't make any difference. If it's the same number of pages, we're talking about a company like Hasbro, who, when they go to publish a book, they say, this is how many books we want. The company comes back, the printing company, the publishing company comes back and says, okay, we can publish it for you at this cost, and they will get much bigger discounts than a company like Paizo because of who they are, but also because of the size of the print run. So one of the things people don't often take into account when they think about how much a book costs is the more books you print, the cheaper it gets, and that discount can be pretty significant. I mean, as a percentage overall of the cost of the book, it can be pretty significant. So if you're printing, and I'm just going to make up numbers because I haven't printed a physical book through a traditional book publisher in a long time. I've done mostly POD, that sort of thing. But if you had a book like Call of the Netherdeep, they're charging $50 for it at retail. They're selling it to the stores for probably 60 to 50% of that total. So if it's a $50 book, they're selling it probably at its best price about $25. So that's what the store is purchasing it for if they are really have the highest discount that you can get from your distributor. They're getting it at $25. The distributor that they buy it from, the distributor that the retailer buys it from, buys that book for $25, and the company that published it, in this case Paizo, spent, I'll say, maybe $5 to print the book. That would be a pretty pricey book. So when you pick up, for instance, this here, Monsters of the Multiverse, which would have a retail price of probably $50-ish, right? It's probably the same as any of these. It costs probably about $5 to make. Now, if you print a ton of them, that price could drop to $4 to $3.50 per book. And you can see how that's a significant increase in the percentage of profit that the publisher makes, and when they sell it to the retailer or to the distributor, and then the distributor and the retailer both make the same amount no matter what. It's just that same percentage that they make. So when Paizo publishes an adventure, if it costs $50 to print X number of thousands of books, or $60 to print that and sell it at retail, it's because the book to them cost $6 to make, and they want to charge 10 times that amount in order to make enough money to survive. And yes, that's 8 to 10 times is what you're supposed to charge for something like that. And Wizards of the Coast, on the other hand, might print, I don't know, some percentage more, 100% more, 200% more, 50% more of any given adventure than any specific Pathfinder adventure. And so maybe they get that book printed for only $4 a piece or $5 a piece. And that same multiplier means that's a $50 book. So you can see how the economy of scale makes a huge difference. So the fact that this is $60 just tells you that Paizo is a smaller company. It doesn't necessarily say they're money-grubbing jerks who are trying to get as much money. No, they're trying to just make a profit. That's it. That's all they're trying to do. And that's why you'll see books that are super thin that will cost $30 or $20 that aren't half the size of a book that costs $50. They're much less, and that's just an economy of scale thing. It has nothing to do necessarily with the company saying, oh, we're going to charge as much as possible. And if that were true, gaming books would cost $100. Because believe me, absolutely $100 worth of value goes into creating one of these books, and you certainly get more than $100 of value out of them, especially something like the Player's Handbook or the Dungeon Master's Guide for any game system, right? The Monster Manual, all that stuff. Those are the core books. You use them over and 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 over, and absolutely pay for themselves. And they would, even if they charged $100 a piece for them, because they are nearly perennially useful. So there you go. That's kind of how publishing works in a really quick nutshell, and why you see these differences in prices between companies, why you see companies like Paizo producing things for 5e, why I personally, and why I'm sure Paizo and the people who work there and made this decision personally believe it's a fantastic idea, because it allows them to expose all of their content to new people who have come into the hobby within the last 10 years who don't have any association with 3rd edition and thereby with Pathfinder, other than they've heard it mentioned on the early episodes of Critical Role, because they used to be playing a Pathfinder game. So this is a fantastic thing. This is not a problem. This is not a problem for anybody who plays Pathfinder, anybody who's a Paizo fan. If you think it's a problem, you're wrong. I mean, that's just all there is to it. This does not signal the death knell of Pathfinder or Pathfinder 2e. This is just a way for Paizo to get their stuff in front of new people, and yes, to make a little bit more money than they would have otherwise. But this is what you call a smart use of assets that you already have. They have all this content done. They need to convert it. That will take some time and effort. And it's going to be just as good as the Pathfinder content. It's just going to be for 5e. I'm super looking forward to more 5e content from Pathfinder and from Paizo, because I love their setting. They went about it in such a fun way. Just like each country has its own personality, and you can do different things. And they've had fantastic, really interesting and fun adventure paths. Like from the very first one, even before the first one, when they were printing stuff in Dragon magazine, when they did the Age of Worms and the Shackled City, I think it was called. Just great, fantastic adventures. Really, really good. If you can find the Age of Worms, go find it, because it's a really cool adventure path. But it was published in or Dungeon magazine, so there's all sorts of legal issues. I doubt it will ever be reprinted. I know they did a Shackled City collection many, many years ago that I wish they could do that for Age of Worm. That would just be so great. Anyway, so that's what's going on with Pathfinder. If you play Pathfinder, keep playing Pathfinder. I mean, if that's the game you want to play, just play it, because it's not going anywhere. I swear to God, they have no plans to get rid of Pathfinder, and if they do, their plans like with Vic and Eric and Lisa and whoever else sitting around at work going, what do you think? Like, what at what point do we look at Pathfinder and go, it's just not worth it? They're not having that conversation. Like, I can't imagine they're having that conversation. If anything, they're looking at it and going like, okay, they're worried about just making sure everything keeps going in general. They're not worried about the game line ending. That's just not a concern that they have. Uh, Not on a consistent basis. I mean, not any more than any business owner has at any given time. This is going to be a really great thing. I am super looking forward to it. And this adventure was written by James Jacobs, Vanessa Hoskins, and Stephen Radley McFarlane. I'm not familiar with Vanessa Hoskins, but James Jacobs I know does great work. Stephen Radley McFarlane, I know I've been out with once or twice. Super good guy, really creative. I know he's got his own stuff that he's working on now, which you should check out. His The Delve is on Patreon, which is a game he's been working on. So check that out from him. And I know he also just took a job somewhere else. He hasn't really talked much about that, but he's working on something new, and it sounds very cool. So there you go. Please don't worry about Pathfinder. Please don't worry about Paizo. Continue to buy their stuff if you're a fan, because they're going to keep making stuff, and they make really amazing, amazing products. And I'm excited to see what they do with 5e. So there you go. That's all I have to say about Pathfinder and 5e. It's not a big deal. I think it's actually a really good thing. So now we're going to jump over to THAC0 Thursday. If you have any other questions about Pathfinder and Paizo, if I feel like I have an answer for you, I will provide it. I know these people, and if I need to, I can reach out and ask them questions to get answers. But this is really, ultimately, I think, just a fantastic thing, and I hope everybody's really excited about it. I'm super excited about it. So for THAC0 Thursday, we're going to jump over, and I found a PDF of the AD&D Player's Handbook. So this is the classic Moloch statue on the cover, the classic old art. And yes, this is just illegal online. Found a copy of it and started going through it, but that's fine because I don't even need to own a PDF of this. I have the physical book sitting right next to me here, so you can see the old books were all black and white. This is the game that I started playing with. There's like every single page we could go over and talk about something in here. Let's see here. So this is a good one. We've talked about this before. Depending on your race, you had certain class level limits that you could not go higher than in that class. So if you were a dwarf, if you were a cleric, you could only go to 8th level. If you were an elf, you could go to 7th level, a gnome 7th level, a half-elf 5th level. If you were a halfling, no, they don't have clerics. Just don't have them. Sorry. Half-orc could go to 4th level. In cleric, human, unlimited. Humans are unlimited in everything. And each of the other classes has one, or each of the other races has... Come on, cat. Leave my mic alone. Come on. Each of the other races has one class that they can go up an unlimited number of levels. So for dwarves and elves and gnomes and half-elves and halflings, that is rogue or thief. It's actually called thief in this. And for half-orc, the unlimited level was assassin. So that gives you an idea of what half-orcs were supposed to be like in the early editions. If you were going to be a fighter, for some reason as a dwarf, you were limited to 9th level, 7th level as an elf, 6th level as a gnome, 8th level as a half-elf, 6th level as a halfling, and 10th level as a half-orc. You'll also notice on this chart, if you can see it, that Druid is actually listed as a subclass of Cleric. Paladin and Ranger is listed as a subclass, or subclasses of Fighter. Illusionist, which we don't even really have now, other than a magic user who specializes in the illusion school. But Illusionist was a subclass of Magic user. Assassin was a subclass of Thief, and then Monk stood all on its own. Let's see here. Other interesting things just about this chart. Only humans could be monks. Only half-orcs were limited on level as a thief. No other class. No, I'm wrong. No other race except human was allowed to be a paladin. Yeah, so no monks or paladins that weren't human. And all the races had some sort of limitations in terms of class except for humans. And then if we go down, and these were just things that uh, I don't know the exact reasons why the creators decided to do level limits. I think this was just a personal bias that came out of the fiction that they thought they needed to incorporate into the rules as opposed to having it just be anybody can do anything. And maybe they thought that was too freeform. It was too much. Like it doesn't make sense that a halfling should be religious. I don't know where that thought comes from. Because they can't be clerics. I don't get that. So there's some weird things, and you might be able to go to 7th level as a cleric because you're an elf, but if you have a high enough wisdom, maybe you could go to 8th or 9th level. And though there were all sorts of weird exceptions like this, half-elven magic users with intelligence of less than 17 are limited to 6th level. Those with a 17th intelligence are limited to 7th level. Gnome illusionists with an intelligence or dexterity under 17th are limited to 5th level. Those that have both intelligence and dexterity of 17 or higher are limited to 6th level. So all of these exceptions. I mean, I used to refer to AD&D as basically just a collection of exceptions. That's all it was. Every single rule had an exception, and over the years, that's been whittled down to instead be here are the rules, and then certain classes and features and abilities allow you to alter or break those rules, but every single rule is not an exception. Let's see here. Notes regarding character race table 2. Numbers in parentheses. Okay, so the numbers, penalties, and bonuses. So this is where the racial penalties and bonuses were. And yes, there were penalties. This is something that also was done away with in... Man, was it only in 5th edition? I think it was in... No, it was in 4th edition. I don't think they had any negative modifiers in 4th edition, but they definitely don't really have any in 5th edition. But the dwarf had a +1 to Constitution, -1 to Charisma. Elves had +1 to Dexterity, -1 to Constitution. Half-orcs had +1 to Strength and Constitution, -2 to Charisma. Halflings had -1 to Strength, +1 to Dexterity. And some of these I don't really mind. Especially like the halfling having a strength negative modifier, I think makes sense, just given their size and weight. They're not going to be able to physically be as strong as somebody who is 6 feet tall. It's just how things work. However, there is always room for the exceptional, right? And that's what we're dealing with when it comes to your characters. And I think that's what they missed in these early days is the average member of a race could be, like for a halfling, a little weaker than an average human. That would make some sort of sense. But if you're playing a character, you want your character to be literally exceptional. And so I can see why they put these modifiers in, but I think for player characters, and again, this was so early days, people weren't thinking in this sort of headspace of not only are you the hero, but you are really an exceptional person, and you are different and better than the other members of your race, not just because you're going out and adventuring, but because you are a hero. There is a story being told about you, and there's not about the guy who's, fetching packages and delivering them for different businesses in the area. That's a stevedore or somebody like that. It's just, you are not that. Maybe that's where you came from, but now you are an adventurer. It's just sort of interesting to go back and look at this. Here's more things. Character ability scores by racial type. And this covers the character's race, and it shows you the minimums and maximums that you needed to have in stats to be a member of that race. So, for example, if you were wanting to play a dwarven anything, and you had a particularly crappy roll that you put into strength, and you decide to put a 7 there, then you couldn't actually be a dwarf. There you go. That's it. And if you were a female dwarf, if you were a male dwarf, you could have an 18 strength, but if you were a female dwarf, you could only have a 17 strength maximum. So you can see not only are there gender, or not only are there racial biases here, but there's also gender biases here with regards to strength, constitution, dexterity, intelligence, like all sorts of stuff. Intelligence, everybody's maxed out at an 18 for male and female, except for half-orcs. Half-orcs are just 1 point dumber. Why does that 1 point matter? It doesn't. It's just supposed to give an indication that, nope, they're just not as good as the other races can be. But that was also kind of spread throughout all of this. Charisma for half-orc maxed out at a 12. That's obviously gone away. And this was also at a time when really even the idea of a half-orc was weird, because half-orcs in, well, Tolkien were just evil. That's all they were there for. And so to have a half-orc was sort of like, so I'm a half-evil race? And it was, even at the time, it was a really weird choice, I thought. I didn't understand why you would want to play a half-orc, but now I really love them. And it's these sorts of weird game design decisions that now people are looking at, and even at the time, a lot of people looked at them and go, and thought, like, why do that? Why have these differences? Like, yeah, some of it kind of makes sense. I can see the stuff with the halfling. I could maybe see some other minor things to reflect. You know, elves are much more mystical, and maybe that they're more empowered when it comes to, like, mystically empowered, not naturally, but mystically empowered in their ability to understand magic or something like that. But it really is better to just put everybody who is a hero on the same level playing field and go from there, and then make your setting reflect what the average sort of people are supposed to be like, and your characters are exceptional. So I totally get why people are questioning this sort of thing now, and it's just so fiddly. Like, oh, I need to keep, oh, my stat's not, okay, I need to, can I re-roll this? Can I add 1 to a stat so I can actually be the race I want to be? And yeah, okay, fine. Like, it's just silly rules that were not necessary. And again, people will absolutely disagree with me and say it doesn't make sense and yada yada yada, you're so woke and blah blah blah. All I want to do is have a game that anybody can sit down at the table and have a good time with. And you don't get that by introducing tons and tons of fiddly little rules and potentially racist, sexist rules that are going to automatically turn people off. So yeah, I get it, and this is the sort of thing that we had back in the day. This is just how the books showed up, and you went, oh, okay, that's seems like a weird thing. Why can't an elf be a fighter to the same level as a human? Like, what? Why? I don't. And so a lot of people, like my gaming group, just ignored those limitations because we thought they were dumb. And that's an argument that the old school people will say is, the old version is the best, it's the best. Okay, then ask them which house rules they have, because they will have house ruled it to be something completely different that makes it's just a toolbox, and that's what they argue for, is like, well, that's all it is. Yes, you're right, that's all it is, but let's make it a toolbox that works for everybody. And yeah, there you go. So there's a THAC0 Thursday for you. I hope you find that interesting. I am, like I said, just super interested to go back and look at this old book through the eyes of 30, 40 years of gaming and 30, 40 years of cultural shift, which I absolutely welcome because we are in a really fantastic time with regards to role-playing games in general right now. And yeah, I look forward to seeing where everything goes. It's really super exciting and cool, and things like the Pathfinder and Paizo and 5e stuff, also super exciting. So I hope you like it. If you have questions on anything, if you want me to cover anything specific in THAC0 Thursday, I welcome any suggestions. And have yourself a good day. I will be back on Tuesday, if not sooner. All right. Have a good time. I hope you get some gaming in. I'm playing tonight. I played last night. I don't think I'll play this weekend, but maybe I will. Who knows? Stand by for adventure.